Broadcasting from high atop the Pallet Tribune headquarters in Celadon City, this is WTPT-Pokemon Radio. Welcome to another nocturnal episode of WTPT. I'm Joey.
And I'm not Casey. He couldn't be here today. I'm actually, as you may recognize my voice, I'm Stephen Wright, the station manager of PIRN, the Pokemon Internet Radio Network, here in the studio in Brooklyn, New York, visiting Joey.
Yes, and Casey has the week off, yeah. Let's put it that way. So, Steve's here today, and he's going to help me do an episode about Pokemon's or the first movie's soundtrack.
The pop soundtrack. You may talk a little bit about the score as well if we have time.
Cool. Yeah, do they have like a separate recording of that?
Yes, it is, and that one is completely on iTunes, by the way. We'll get into a little bit of the some of the licensing stuff about these songs. But
first, news. Big news that we haven't spoken about yet because it hasn't been an episode in a few weeks. The black and white versions were announced. Generation 5 is finally here. What do you think so far?
It looks pretty cool. One thing we've noticed is that it looks like they're doing away with the static camera that we saw in Generation 4, where it was always in the same position. It looks like it's going to pan around a bit.
Right, it's pretty interesting. I mean, it still looks like it's not going to be a fully 3D environment, but like at least some of the parts that they show, like this cityscape, is like looks like you walk in a circle around the city. So it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, that looks definitely a definite improvement to make it look really 3D. Now, they did not state because, of course, all we have is that little press release whether or not there'll be any 3DS features where this might be a dual cart situation like the original Gold and Silver were. I don't know if I would get my hopes up about that. It could go either way.
That would be interesting, though. 3DS capabilities.
Yeah, like I said, I think we have heard officially that they will run the original DS. So, like I said, it might be like a dual cart thing. Like
right. That's what I'm hoping for. At least, I mean, I'm hoping that they at least because every generation of Pokemon has made use of the next generation of every
that's not completely
Game Boy
true,
system,
actually, because you remember at least when they came out in the US, the original games, they came out like a couple months before the Game Boy Color. And that was one of the things people didn't like about the Game Boy Color. It's like I bought these Pokemon games and they look better on my Super Game Boy and my Super Nintendo than
what I mean, though, is that like the original ones were specifically for the regular Game Boy. Then the next generation made use of Game Boy Color. Then the next generation Game Boy Advanced, and then DS. So hopefully, the Generation 5 ones will take advantage of 3DS.
I think at the very least they will support some of the DSi features. Like you'll have access to the extra Wi-Fi channels. Like you'll be able to use it over the WPA security.
Sure.
I think Pokemon is definitely Nintendo's most online franchise at this point, more so than even like Metroid or even Animal Crossing hasn't in terms of install base hasn't reached that pinnacle yet.
That's true. Yeah. So as far as details about the games, though, all we really have is a few screenshots, a couple maybe less than 30 seconds of footage from it, and we know two of the Pokemon that are going to be in it. That's of course Zoroark and Zorua, the devolved form of that, the stars of the 13th movie. Beyond that, though, the more information's to come.
Yeah,
that will probably slowly trickle out. I bet the next thing we'll see is probably the starter Pokemon.
Yeah, I mean, if there are any 3DS features, we won't find that out until after or at E3, probably.
Right. That's probably when they'll hold off till.
We don't even really know how this hardware works. There are some theories that it uses some sort of parallax barrier technique that Philips has demoed. But we really don't know. For all we know, it uses little stick figures that come out of the DS.
That ought to be interesting. Like in Star Wars when they're playing that chess game.
Yeah.
Let the Wookiee win. All right. There was a news item that you wanted to mention. The Worlds stuff.
Yeah, so we have found out, we've known about the TCG Worlds, the structure for that for a little while, but we found out earlier, a week or two ago, about the structure for the video game World Championships. So they've been running stuff in Japan for a while. They've had the ability to do that mainly because Heart Gold and Soul Silver came out earlier there. But starting, I think it's next month, there are 6 cities in the U.S. They're mostly the same cities or nearby to what was the regional qualifiers last year. But they are massively increasing the number of players that will be allowed.
That's good, because they turned away a lot of people last year, including many TPTers.
Yeah, because last year the cap was 128 for each division. This year, I believe it is 512 for juniors and 7 68. I think that's the correct number.
Wow.
For seniors.
Cool.
And then they're also running, I think they're actually running one extra event in Europe, I think. Don't quote me on that. I'd have to check the list.
Okay.
And then now at Nationals, there's going to be, instead of having a semi-national tournament where there's a few open spots for other people, they're going to have a last chance qualifier, which is something they've done to the card game at Worlds for many years. But they're doing this at Nationals for the U.S. the day before the main tournament, so that'll be another, I think it's regional-sized tournament, so you have another chance there at Nationals on, I think it's Friday, to earn a spot in there. As usual, of course, you can't play in both the video game and trading card game Nationals. You have to choose one or the other. That's just a logistical thing.
Yeah. Most of the events are probably going on at the same time.
Yeah, they are. And no unified title. Sorry.
All right. So I think that's just about all the news we have to mention today.
The most major one.
That's the major stuff. But so we might as well get on to our main topic. The first movie soundtrack.
The pop one. There's also an instrumental one. So
how much of how many tracks on this? Maybe about
16.
16.
There's 16 on both the first and the second movie pop soundtrack.
And how many of these tracks actually appear in the movie?
I think about half of them do. Because let me think. The Pokemon theme, of course.
Yeah.
Don't Say You Love Me is in the credits.
Then there's the Blessed Union of Souls song.
That's in the climax where Ash watches over the fighting Pokemon. I think Soda Pop is in there, and Somewhere Someday by NSYNC. I'm trying to think. And then Vacation by Vitamin C.
Oh, sure.
And I think Catch Me If You Can is in there. I think that's about half of them.
Okay.
The rest are inspired by the motion picture to varying degrees of success. So, personally, I think this album is unfairly judged. I know some of you don't tune out right away. I think a lot of people criticize it. The main point of criticism is that, well, gee, most of these songs were never intended to be Pokemon songs. I think that's an unfair criticism. When you look at, just in the Diamond and Pearl generation, the ending songs of the movies, I'll Always Remember You, This Is a Beautiful World, and If We Only Learn. None of those are really Pokemon songs. If you look at them, it's just they were used in the Pokemon context.
Yeah.
And they're, I like all those songs. I haven't heard too much of If We Only Learn because we're still waiting for an announcement date on the Arceus DVD in the U.S. I know a lot of people, of course, internationally have not even seen the movie, but anyway, so yeah, there are 16 tracks on this, and it's not really that unusual. This happens a lot, even more contemporarily. A bunch of people contribute.
The first movie and the second movie are the only ones with full pop soundtracks, right?
Yeah, the third one sort of has one, but it's very much an overlap with Totally Pokemon.
Okay.
And everything since then, there obviously has not been one. Although you could make, as I pointed out in an article I wrote for the Palette Tribune a couple months ago, you could make 2 or 3 albums with the songs they have not released on CD or iTunes or anywhere like that.
Right.
Unfortunately. I know there's some logistical issues, as I point out. I'm sure there's some business and stuff, but I would like to see those come out eventually. Anyway, the 16 tracks on here, only a couple were really designed for the movie. Obviously, the Pokemon theme is a redo from the TV show. It's fairly different. We'll go through all of these, and then Catch Me If You Can. That's in this movie, and it's also actually in Pokemon Puzzle League for the N64.
Oh, really? Do you know what point that is?
It's one of the stages. I wish you guys had me on there for Retro Month, because if you had gone on GameFAQs, you would have noticed that I actually wrote the top guide for that game.
Nice.
Well, it never came out in Japan, so there was never a Japanese guide. Believe it or not, folks, yes, there is a Japanese an American Pokemon game that never came out in Japan, and it's Pokemon Puzzle League for the N64.
Huh, that's very interesting.
Anyway, so basically these things come out when there's a movie. They'll have some tracks from the movie, but then they'll usually throw in some other stuff. And usually what these are, they're a compilation of B-sides. Now, for those of you who are not Joe C's age, back in the 80s and earlier, there used to be, and they don't only make 45s anymore, there used to be these things called vinyl records. They were black on both sides usually. And then there were different sizes. There's 12-inch vinyl, which is about 12 inches across, and there's 7-inch vinyl, which is a little bit bigger than a CD, but it only holds one song on each side. And the smaller ones were usually 45s, which means they ran around 45 revolutions per minute. And so what would happen is artists would release albums, but they would also release singles. And so on the A side, there would be the main, the radio play track that people would want to buy the single for. And then on the B side, there was usually another song. It might have been something from the album, but oftentimes it was just something that didn't make it to the album, didn't fit in the album, or various other reasons. Go ahead and look up B-sides on Wikipedia, and it'll explain what exactly they are.
So you're saying most of the tracks on here are B-sides from the artists?
For the most part, a bunch of them were. Some of them were not. So obviously, Pokemon theme that was original to this. Don't Say You Love Me was a single for M2M, but we'll get into that in a second. So this is not that unusual. What is unusual is the fact that the album sold 2 million copies in the U.S.
Yeah, that's pretty big, huh?
That is, much better than these things usually sell. If you discount stuff like, Purple Rain or the Beatles movies, things, the soundtracks where the soundtrack was really the main attraction and not the movie, you have to get into stuff like, Top Gun before you get into stuff that, Top Gun did definitely sell much more than this, but 2 million is a lot better than these things usually sell. In fact, I happen to know this. This album was so popular in the U.S. that they actually packaged and sold it in Japan. I'm not kidding. If you go to the Japanese Pokemon website and dig around the music section long enough, you will see a picture that looks exactly like this one. They actually sold this album in Japan.
Wow.
In, I guess, 2000. Because, like I said, 2 million copies. Double platinum in the U.S. is the name for that, and it sold that well. So you may have noticed on the Pokemon Movie 2000 DVD, if you look in the extras, one of the guys mentioned how well this album sold, and it sold that well. It actually peaked at number 8 on the Billboard Top 200, which is, again, very high. Higher than any of the other Pokemon albums.
So did the second movie soundtrack sell a lot less? Is that why they kind of stopped at that point? Or?
Well, first of all, the movies were going to fewer and fewer theaters, and I think we'll explain more as time goes on. But the second movie soundtrack only made in, I think, the 80s, and To Be a Master was about the same, believe it or not. And I think what happened when they were pressing this initially is they thought, well, it'll probably sell about as well as To Be a Master, which had come out about 4 or 5 months earlier in the year. And then it sold like crazy. I think there may have actually been a shortage at one point because it peaked about late November, around Thanksgiving. I think there was an initial shipment and it sold out pretty much because it sold way more than they were expecting, and they had to make another shipment. I think can't vouch for that personally, but I think I remember my sister being very jealous of the. She was a big NSYNC fan at the time. She was very jealous of me having access to Somewhere Someday, which we'll get into. We'll go through these probably in roughly order.
Okay.
But that's a brief overview. Like I said, it's not really that unusual for artists to contribute a bunch of B-sides type songs to this. What's unusual is that it sold 2 million copies.
Yeah. Wow, I had no idea that it was way more popular than even To Be a Master.
In terms of the Billboard Top 200 Albums chart, it did chart much higher.
Yeah.
I don't know what the actual sales figures were for the other albums, but...
Keep listening for more from this interview